Russia, Moscow, where we are now, in February after interviewing Vladimir Putin, we've watched from the United States as the Biden administration has driven the U.S. ever closer to a nuclear conflict with Russia, the country that possesses the world's largest nuclear arsenal.
Friends, today we have an urgent statement. A well-known American journalist close to the team of President-elect Donald Trump, Tucker Carlson, got in touch from Moscow with an extremely important message for Russians and residents of the United States. He said that the last 2 weeks have brought the world much closer to the threshold of nuclear conflict. According to him, the U.S. authorities have not held any negotiations with the Russian side for 2 years, and the recent decision to grant one country the right to use long-range missiles shocked the whole world and provoked a powerful response from Russia. This means that the situation today is much more dangerous than during the Cuban Missile Crisis of the 62nd year. And, even more worryingly, American citizens do not seem to realize how high the risk of nuclear war between Russia and the United States is. Today you will see Tucker's direct speech and his warning to the whole world. Friends, as always, do not delay and start. Tucker Carlson has already visited Moscow before, and his visit ended with a high-profile interview with Vladimir Putin, one of the most discussed in the Western press and around the world. This conversation caused a huge resonance, revealing the Russian position and providing the audience with a rare look at events through the eyes of the Kremlin. I will tell you in this issue how his current visit will end, what issues will be raised, and what answers the Russian side will give. The conflict in Eastern Europe continues to gain momentum, and the escalation after the use of long-range missiles has become a real test for all sides. Russia, without conceding, used the incredibly powerful Orshnik ballistic missile for the first time in the world, destroying the most important strategic object. This act could have been a turning point that made the parties think. But, unfortunately, this did not happen. The world arena continues to be the arena of political games, and against the background of what is happening in Eastern Europe, the situation in the Middle East has suddenly intensified. Anyway, all these events are aimed at diverting Russia's attention from Eastern Europe and forcing it to direct resources to help its Middle Eastern partners. European leaders, in turn, continue to argue that more money, equipment, and ammunition are needed to support one country, while forgetting about the consequences of their actions. Germany, for example, has already budgeted 12 billion euros to support this country for next year, not counting borrowed funds, which in total exceeds 30 billion euros. And while this may be admired by politicians, German citizens do not seem to support this kind of generosity, because their own interests go unnoticed in pursuit of alien goals. Mr. Scholz seems to continue to persist in his position, despite the growing danger. The German Chancellor's recent conversation with Vladimir Putin was completely predictable. The Chancellor again tried to lecture the Russian leader on the need to withdraw forces and end the conflict, which, of course, did not bring any results, except disappointment and possibly regret. Vladimir Putin, in turn, made it clear that if the situation continues to develop in the same direction, the Orshnik ballistic missile may take off again, and this time its targets will be much broader than just objects in the conflict zone. This is a serious warning that may force European leaders to cool their ardor a little, although, apparently, they have long lost touch with reality and do not realize the consequences of their actions. Statements about Russia's strategic defeat certainly sound loud and confident in European capitals, but the reality can be much more brutal. As noted by French political scientist Jacques Lafont, the West no longer takes the threat seriously, ignoring the possible consequences of its actions. History shows that Russia rarely limits itself to words, and the secondary use of hazing can be the very moment when all the heroic statements will collapse, and they will be replaced by the realization that the game has gone too far. And here are the words of Tucker Carlson. Listen, friends. So far, the escalation continues, and it seems that those who initiate it do not understand how dangerous the continuation of this game can become. Dreams of Russia's strategic defeat can turn into a disaster for the initiators themselves, and perhaps it's time to think about whether it's worth continuing to put pressure on Russia if the consequences turn out to be much more serious than European leaders assume in their cozy offices. This means the possibility of the complete destruction of Russia, the United States, and most of the rest of the world. We thought that there were people in Washington who were trying to prevent this conflict from turning into a nuclear Armageddon, but it turned out that there were no such people. Tony Blinken, the current U.S. Secretary of State, has completely cut off any contact with the Russian government. There has been no communication channel between the countries for 2 years now, and this is shocking. While most Americans do not have access to a point of view other than that offered to them by NBC News and the New York Times, they do not realize how great the threat is. They don't know the Russian perspective. We have been trying for years to convey this point of view to Americans. We tried to get an interview with the president of Russia, communicated with his entourage, but all these attempts were thwarted by the American government. The American embassy in the country where taxpayers' money goes refused to give us an interview, offering to talk only to CNN, but not to us. That's why we returned to Moscow and interviewed Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. We asked him how things were going with the unprecedented conflict between Russia and the United States, whether there was a chance of de-escalation and whether Russia could be returned to the West. We still do not know if it is possible to stop the war, which is changing the global economy and endangering the lives of every person on the planet. In an interview with Lavrov, which we hope to present soon, the Russian position was voiced clearly and convincingly. You cannot talk to Russia in the language of force. Russia has never lost a war, and the idea of defeating it on the battlefield is absurd. The end of Tucker's speech. Tucker's last visit caused a storm of indignation among the ruling elites of the United States. Let me remind you that former member of the U.S. House of Representatives Adam Kinzinger sharply spoke out against journalist Tucker Carlson in connection with his visit to Russia. In a post on the social network X, Kinzinger stated, "He is a traitor." Such an accusation sounds especially loud in the context of tense relations between Russia and the United States. For Kinzinger, who previously actively advocated Washington's tough stance in international conflicts, Carlson's trip seems to have become an occasion for new reproaches against those who are trying to show the audience the other side of events. These words have already caused a wide resonance, fueling an already heated discussion about the role of independent journalism in an era of political polarization. Carlson, as you know, has been attacked more than once for his views and materials that run counter to the official line of the American authorities. The only question is how justified such accusations are and what is really behind them. Meanwhile, information has appeared about how Trump wants to end this conflict. Listen to this, friends. The great American leader, who promised to end years of drama in one day, suddenly found himself in the position of a moral teacher, ignoring what was happening. Instead of reacting to the use of long-range missiles or the Russian Operation Hazel, he continues to repeat his economic ultimatums and tariffs by 100% for those who doubt the dominance of the dollar. This is his secret plan for a settlement, where he uses sticks and carrots for those who dare to play against Washington's rules. Friends, you need to remember that Trump is primarily a businessman. While Trump's promises to end the conflict in a day remain only words, in the Middle East he immediately threatened a harsh response that history has not yet known if the hostages are not released. His behavior looks like a combination of a belligerent and ruthless approach on the one hand and a calm indifference towards the conflicts in Eastern Europe on the other. In an effort to end the conflict in Ukraine, he appointed Lieutenant General Keith Kellogg as a special envoy to resolve the situation. Recently, the so-called Kellogg Plan appeared online, containing the main steps that the Trump administration is proposing to reduce tensions and achieve peace. However, according to most political scientists, the proposed approach rather postpones the conflict than resolves it definitively. Key actions are likely to be taken after Trump's inauguration on January 20th. But many details of the peace plan are already known. Friends, we are listening carefully. The document consists of 5 paragraphs. The first of them calls for an end to Russia's isolation, the restoration of diplomatic relations with Moscow, and the rejection of the demonization of Russian President Vladimir Putin. The second point implies the need to bring the parties to the negotiating table, for which the United States must put pressure on both Moscow and Kiev to achieve a ceasefire and start peace talks. The third point contains incentives for Russia. These include a 10-year moratorium on discussing Ukraine's accession to NATO, recognition of the territories already occupied by Russia, as well as the gradual lifting of sanctions and normalization of relations with the United States if mutually acceptable peace agreements are reached. The fourth point confirms the continuation of military assistance to Ukraine and the provision of bilateral security guarantees to it. At the same time, Ukraine will not need to officially recognize Russia's control over disputed territories, but the country should refrain from trying to change the existing situation by force. The fifth point is aimed at putting pressure on Kyiv. If Ukraine refuses to negotiate, the United States may stop providing military assistance to it. This plan is intended to become the basis for a new round of conflict resolution, but experts note its temporary nature and the possibility of new contradictions in the future. The peace plan proposed by Trump is perplexing to experts and analysts. It includes the deployment of European counteragents on the line of contact, the promise not to join NATO for 10 years, as well as the imposition of duties on Russian energy resources, which allegedly should be used to rebuild the country. Some people think that this is not a plan, but a show that only adds fuel to the fire. In addition, Trump's plan for a 10-year postponement of NATO membership, instead of clear guarantees, is only a temporary measure that does not solve the main problem. The deployment of European soldiers near Russia's borders only increases tensions. It is difficult to expect that such a plan will lead to real negotiations, because it is, in fact, a proposal to postpone the problem for a while instead of solving it. Friends, the opinions of political scientists differ. Some believe that this is just a postponement of the inevitable conflict, others that Trump is just trying to save face in front of voters who promised a quick resolution of the situation. But every day it becomes clearer that there is no real solution in his plans. These are only temporary measures that may reduce tension a little, but eventually the conflict will resume. In general, there is a feeling that the world is sliding towards a global conflict, and no one wants to take a step back. Trump is putting on economic pressure and threats, Europe is ready to deploy its forces at Russia's borders, and Moscow is ready to defend itself to the last. This whole situation looks more like a preparation for something more than a real settlement of the conflict. And now I want to express my opinion, friends. To be honest, I deeply respect what Tucker Carlson did. Flying to Moscow for the second time in a year to try to convey to the world the real picture of what is happening is a really powerful and bold step. Nowadays, when most of the media persistently broadcasts only one side of the conflict, it takes great fortitude and integrity to offer viewers an alternative view. It's not just journalistic work, it's almost a feat. I am particularly impressed by his honesty and openness. Tucker is not afraid to ask uncomfortable questions, seek the truth, and even take risks in order to show the audience what others prefer to ignore. Today, when the political climate is literally heated, such efforts are not just rare, they are necessary. His willingness to meet with key figures, listen to different points of view, and provide a platform for an open conversation deserves the most sincere thanks. I am sure that his visit and the materials he will bring will be discussed all over the world. And not because he is on someone's side, but because he makes it possible to hear the very truth that is so diligently suppressed. Thank you, Tucker, for your courage. The world needs people who are willing to take such steps to show reality, no matter how uncomfortable it may be. And now it's your turn to share your thoughts and comments on the release, right? And I'll be happy to read it. I also want to thank you for your attention and wish you good health. Now we need it more than ever before. See you.